So lastly, what is the current involvement of EMA in R&D activities in this area? So with respect to antibacterials and other tools to target antimicrobial resistance, and a little bit about the future perspective. So over the years, we've seen an increased demand and interaction with various stakeholders, such as patient and healthcare professional, interaction with academia researchers, and this has led to a greater involvement of the agency into regulatory science discussion outside of what we usually called our core business. And this involvement has ranged from providing forum for discussion to leading networks or leading research projects. So all in all, we have seen an increase in the request for contribution to research program by the EMA. Now, with respect to the role and the level of involvement of the agency, there is a paper that has been drafted and published at the beginning of this year, which tried to underline and clarify what is the level of engagement and how this can be done. And essentially, we are talking about very important aspects such as the level of conflict of interest that may be one of the major drivers in terms of how much we can engage and be involved into research programs. The resources of the agency, which is always something not to be undervalued, and quite importantly, what would be the expected benefits for the agency. And in this document, essentially 3 levels have been distinguished. First of all, it could be the role of a coordinator of a research project. It could be a participant in a research activity, or it could have an advisory role. And also there is the possibility to be simply an observer, which is essentially the role that would include the least amount of time spent and also the least problems in terms of conflict of interest. Now, when we look into the area of the research in which the EMA could be happy to engage, this has to take into account the applicability and the relevance to the agency work. What would be the added value from regulators to be involved in such projects? And also, as a last point, to take into account the importance for the agency to strengthen interinstitutional collaboration with other bodies in the area of public health, such as WHO and ECDC. And essentially, the agency might support research that is expected to help promote public health and to improve the way the agency is evaluating and supervising medicines. And this will be in areas that are closely related to our core role and responsibility, as well as key strategic areas which are defined in roadmap and work program. But in any case, we will be open to consider any emerging issues that would need a very rapid engagement by the agency. The EMA will not get involved in activities that are outside its legal role or its mission statement. And that's also a very important aspect to consider when it comes to these research projects. A very important way in which the agency can engage with research projects in a more formal way is the qualification procedures, which is a procedure that is handled by the Scientific Advice Working Party, which is a working party of the CHMP. And this, I will not enter into the detail of this, but essentially it will take the form either of a qualification advice on the future protocols and methods for further method developments towards a qualification, or really a qualification opinion on the acceptability of a specific proposed method based on the assessment of submitted data. So there are different levels of engagement within these procedures, and here there are a variety of different stakeholders that could apply for these procedures and engage with the agency in a more formal way, I would say, around qualification of any kind of biomarkers or new methodological approach. And the vision is indeed to speed up and optimize drug development and utilization and to improve public health at the end of the day. The scope of the qualification procedures covers different areas. We go from preclinical development with many different topics that could be addressed there, clinical development and drug utilization. Again, I will not go into the details of all these aspects, but indeed it's very flexible and there is a wide range of proposals that could be taken into account. Now, if you look at what is for the time being the engagement of the EMA in research projects in the field of prevention and treatment of bacterial infection, you will see here listed what we are doing for the time being. And again, I'm talking about external funded projects. So very recently, we agreed to be part of the external advisory board of the Combat project, which is part of the new drugs for bed bugs, as has been already described. And this is we consider as a starting step, and maybe we will enlarge our presence within this big umbrella within IMI of activities in the area of antimicrobial and the development and other related activities, which we feel is very important. Another area where we are involved is the joint procurement, the joint program initiative on IMR that also was being described by Herman before, and we are a member of the stakeholder board. Then there are a couple of projects around TB in which we are involved. One is the CPTR, which is the Critical Path to TB Regimen, and which is a very large consortium trying to tackle various aspects around development of TB drugs. Notably, there are some activities around validation of surrogate endpoint for rapid approval of new TB drugs. Then there is another one within the IMI umbrella around TB, which is Predict TB, which is around modeling for preclinical development on new regimens for rapidly bring them forward into clinical development. And also I would like to mention one that is not related to treatments but to prevention, which is ADITech, which is a project related to innovative technologies, immunization technology. So it deals essentially around vaccine, but it has a strong component on bacterial vaccines, which is also an important option to keep into consideration when it comes to the fight against antimicrobial resistance. Now, another area where the agency is more engaged is into identifying a research area that could be prioritized by our colleagues in the Commission when it comes to selecting topics that could receive funds. And today gives me an opportunity maybe to raise a few bullet points around some area that indeed could be important and we consider relevant for regulatory science in this area. I will start mentioning like a project that will look into increasing our understanding on best evidence to determine efficacy of antibacterials in clinical studies. So try to improve the evidence standard that we use into pivotal trials and to have better definition as an example of primary endpoint in various important indications. Alluded several times today the key role of PK/PD method in this area, so also their research project that would help in strengthening our appraisal of PK/PD and pharmacometrics of new antibiotics is surely something that would be extremely beneficial. And again, some of the activities ongoing within the IMI umbrella are covering for this. So somehow I have to say also that this is somehow covered there. The value companion diagnostic, as you already heard, there is a project ongoing around that. Maybe there is a need also to put some more effort, and it would be interesting to have some kind of developments that take into account the combination of the diagnostic with a new drug. The increasing in the understanding of the antibiotic effect in different types of infection might be also quite relevant. Just to mention one example, the 2 trials in otitis media published a couple of years ago had quite a significant impact on the regulatory science and the requirements, as you may have seen from the final version of the addendum. Another important and very interesting area somehow tackled by the Combat project is the exploration of novel methodological approach such as Bayesian method, which we believe is a very interesting and important area to further explore and to see how far we can go with that as a new approach towards clinical development for antibacterials. Then, and this I refer back to what Arion presented, is also important to progress regulatory science with regard to emerging science and innovative medicines. Just to mention one, bacteriophage, we heard there is a project funded by the European Commission around that, which would be quite important, but there might be any other areas like nanomedicine, immunomodulators. So there is a plethora of different emerging therapeutic approach that would be interesting to look into what would be the specific issues in terms of regulatory science. Also extremely important is about filling the gaps in knowledge related to all the antibiotics. Again, the Commission is putting effort here. We heard about the colistin studies, but there would be many other antibiotics that could deserve funding for clinical trials that would help everybody and regulators as well to understand how best to use this medicine and to increase our understanding, for example, of the correct posology. Support of pediatric development of antibacterials, also that was raised again. This links back to the use of PKPD and how to make extrapolation and to use pharmacometrics. Again, an important area where we'd like to see some progress also from a research consortia. Interaction with health technology assessment on best evidence. There are some projects already ongoing at the level of EMA that are very broad. It might be also interesting to look specifically into antibacterials and what can be done in this sense and whether there are any specific elements to be taken into account in this respect. And also last, approaches to post-authorization study. We discussed this morning the importance of collecting data in the post-authorization phase when there is an initial approval based on limited data. It would be important to try to understand the best methodology in order to do that. So another important point, we heard that within the IMI umbrella and the combat particular, there is really, the effort there is to conduct really a true public-private partnership for the development of new products. This clearly, because of the conflict of interest, would not be appropriate for EMA to take active part in this kind of initiative. However, as we said, the advice of regulator is perceived to be beneficial here to maximize the chances of success of such projects, particularly taking into account that public money is involved. And therefore, what we are foreseeing is to interact with such consortia in the way of liaison via advisory board, and then to try to push this consortia to have more formal interaction with the agency via systematic interaction with the scientific advice working party in scientific advice procedures. However, of course, particularly when it comes to interaction with advisory board, there are some limitations to the amount of engagement that we can sustain in terms of capacity. So to conclude, EMA is eager to support R&D efforts in this area and also for other options to tackle the issue of AMR. The level of engagement is, however, limited by the potential conflict of interest, the resources, and the expected benefits for the agency. However, we are foreseeing an increase in targeted participation in key projects, essentially within advisory group. However, we may consider and discuss further evolution and maybe much more involvement in specific projects. And of course, we are recommended that more formal interaction by scientific advice working party and biomarker qualification process is taken into account. Thank you.